Hello, Internet. Welcome to Archetype, sponsored by Lenovo and AMD. It is me, your host, on a Tuesday. Ashley, how's it going? When you guys drop in, always feel free to say hello and hi and ask questions. And yeah, we're going to get into it. So, almost a new month, right? So last week we went ahead and did a new drawing for a new character, which we were doing with the student. Ooh, messages already. Hello, Chris. Hello, Zacharo. Hello, Ben. All from Twitch and YouTube. Monkey King, that's right. Or Monkey Queen. Monkey Princess? She's also a student, so not queen yet. But yeah, so we took some reference of some Shaolin monks. I also went ahead and grabbed something real quick. I was just kind of spanning Pinterest at the moment, and I saw this Mongolian type fashion, and I really like the way this is kind of broken up to maybe give her costume. Maybe nothing as fancy, but I like the breakup, so maybe we can add some more interest into the costume than just kind of like generic Goku shirt. So definitely explore that as we get in. But for now, we're going to go ahead and block in the sculpt in ZBrush, now that we've got direction and a design. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over, and we're just going to start blocking in some stuff in ZBrush. As I've said before, I'm a big fan of blocking stuff out 2D first. I think there's just a lot of problems that you can solve by first, starting off in basically 2 dimensions rather than 3. It kind of lends itself to being able to design a little easier. You don't have to worry so much about all the directions. You're just worried about, one said direction. So I think it just leads itself. And then it just gives like a nice guide of, shape language and kind of how we want to approach making this character. And it's one of those things where once you do it, 2D, it's a little easier, at least for me personally, to execute in 3D. So I'll start blocking out where I know that, that face shape will be eventually. And since I know the kind of face shape that I want from like a 3/4 view or whatever it may be, I can start kind of figuring that out a lot easier in 3D. And keeping it super, super low, right? So I can even have the idea of eye sockets in here, even though really this is, look at how low this is, right? It's super low. But from far away, it's kind of like making your paintbrush really big. Kind of the same idea. It was, staying really low with polygons kind of forces you to utilize them as much as possible before going into a higher res thing. And what I'll also probably do for sake of is I'm going to duplicate this, and then I'm going to I'll solo it. I'm going to go ahead and grab this point here. I'm going to delete hidden, close holes, redynamish it. I can snap this here. Can thin this out, make it longer. And now I can have her ears really quickly. And I'll probably keep her ears a separate piece of geo. So it's a really easy way to start blocking out and starting to get an idea of where that is going to sit as well. And it's things like this where, her big fur shapes that she has that makes up most of her face. How does that sit in 3D, now that we've got it? I know it's going to sit in front of where her cheeks are, and there's going to be the back of her skull along with where the jawline sits and things like that, and where the neck comes out in comparison to that. So anatomically, there's a lot more to figure out in 3D. That maybe if you didn't do the drawing first, you'd be like, you know what? I just don't think this is working. It's a lot easier to kind of give up on an idea or a really crazy design when you're doing 3D, just because it's way more difficult to kind of manage these pieces first. But in a drawing, you can push and pull and kind of experiment with a lot of stuff first and not really be married to anything because it doesn't take you that long to block this stuff out. So yeah, I think executing this stuff in 2D first is always really good. Hi, Debugging Hub on Twitch. Monkeys have generally pretty short necks, proportion-wise, so we're gonna definitely play with that. Their shoulders come out rather quickly when you look at proportion. We are putting our character upright, but you know, when you look at reference, their shoulders are very prominent in their silhouettes. So we'll see if we can kind of keep that motif going. Oh, give me the arrow. He kept wanting to be like this. No, it'll dodge you if it wants to. And as a block out, I always like to block out the body, regardless of whether you'll see all of it or not. I think I've mentioned this in previous streams and stuff before, is like, if you can figure out the anatomy of your character, and you see drawings from like Disney characters do it all the time with like Zootopia, or even if it's not an animal, they'll do it all the time where they kind of break down just the body without clothes. So that way then they can figure out how it all properly goes together. So knowing the underlying structure is always really important first. Even if you end up never technically actually seeing it or using it. So again, I like to block in torso, or basically where the rib cage is. And usually the rib cage will come with, you know, the traps and stuff. So kind of like that upper box that we would normally draw in 2D. And then I'll draw the torso, which is basically thinking of it as the squishy bit of your body. Because our bodies are made of basically squishy things and rigid things, right? Bone and muscle are very different in the way they work. Bone obviously cannot be stretched or squashed, you know, so it acts as a landmark for where things sit and lie, and those proportions cannot change. You can't squish your bone up, right? But your muscles can contract and stretch and squash around those things, right? So a lot of that comes with how we can push this character's anatomy and stuff and know what makes sense. Get her arm. And again, I just like to read. I'm a big fan of just grabbing things that already exist in the scene and just grabbing them. And I can pull that down. And then if I want to make that into 2 pieces, it's pretty easy. I can just grab that and isolate it, and then when I dynamesh it, boop, there'll be 2 pieces. And then I can just run that mirror and weld. I always do the wrong side for some reason. I don't know why. I like working on the right side, even though in ZBrush, if you have your character facing the normal direction, the proper direction, it's always going to mirror left to right. So I always have to remind myself of that. Oops, turn back on symmetry. There we go. So yeah, it's really just about getting in all the pieces first when it comes to blocking and stuff. It's not about getting the best shapes yet, because as you can see, like our silhouette doesn't really look like anything yet. I mean, it looks somewhat like maybe a person or you know, something bipedal, but these shapes are super blobby and not very well thought out yet, right? So we're gonna dive into that more once we get the pieces all there. an auto group, and then do another mirror and weld. Grab this guy, and I'll make the foot. I usually like to make the feet bow out a little bit. It just feels a bit more realistic, and feels a bit more natural most of the time. So I usually like to do that. Squish the feet a bit more. And see, these do not look like feet yet, but that is okay. It's just about getting in initial shapes. You can't start doing anything if you don't block in anything first. I think a lot of people will spend too much time probably working on the face first or working on something without actually having the thing as a whole. And then they'll realize like, oh, the face is too big. Like that's what I'm realizing now, right? Like the face in comparison to our drawing is pretty big. So we can, you know, take that now and we can shrink that down. Maybe bring that up a bit. And see, now we know if we want the head to be about this big, then that means the neck's too thick now, right? So that you start kind of going down the line, because proportion is all about context. You know, something only feels short because it's next to long things. Or vice versa, something feels long because it's next to short things, or something feels big because it's next to small things. And that's what proportion really is more importantly about when it comes to designing characters. Ben on Twitch is asking, do I always make characters from scratch or do I use a base mesh? It depends, you know, if I'm doing something that I need done quickly and I know that I have a mesh that's kind of close enough for it, you know, especially if it's like a mesh that's needs to be animated or rigged, then I have a base mesh that I can use. But most of the time I like starting from scratch. When it comes to designing characters and doing stuff like this, I mean, obviously for the stream, I don't start with a base mesh. I always start from just a sphere. You can also use Z-spheres, you know, that's a really nice, handy way to do a block out. And maybe one of these streams I can demo doing a Z-sphere block out instead. Since, you know, if you guys have joined me multiple times, maybe this is a bit repetitive for you guys. So I can always save that. But Osai Sato's asking if I made any changes from last week. The answer is no, mainly because our drawing is fine for, you know, what the purposes of it was. We'll be making probably a lot of changes to 3D. You know, we did a lot of that stuff even for I think almost all the characters. I always find something that I'm like, ooh, I think this would be cooler, or this is nicer to add. And if, you know, if you're kind of stuck and can't figure that out in 3D, then I think it's important to go back to the literal drawing board of, you know, blocking it out in like a drawing, rather than trying to fight yourself through 3D, I think can be kind of helpful. But in this case, I feel confident enough with the design and maybe the direction that I want to go in that I think we'll be okay not having to do any sort of crazy drawing. If it was more complicated, then possibly, but I don't think that's going to be the issue. But yeah, as students, I definitely, going back to Ben's question, as students, I think it's super important to start from scratch as often as possible. Just because, you know, if you're a student and you're learning, you want that repetition. The only reason why I'm efficient and fast at making a block-in mesh is because I've done it so many times, right? If I just use one base mesh and then use that base mesh forever, and then I actually need to make a new one for something, you know, whether it's getting hired for something or whatever it may be, or, you know, a very different type of game res mesh, then you're only going to have that one experience to draw from, right? So I think it's super important to, as often as possible, just start over. It's the same thing with, you know, when you're practicing drawing, we don't sit and render one drawing for an eternity. At least you shouldn't be. I think the bigger goal to get out of something like that is to, I think I'll split her hair off, actually. which in that case I can just duplicate her ears. You're only going to get so much practice out of rendering one object, which would get way more practice if you render or sketch that object multiple times, right? So it's the same. It's the same concept. Start to try to figure out blocking in a bit more where those eye sockets will be. Also trying to make sure that that shape feels maybe slightly more feminine as well. And with that, that'll probably mean giving her a little bit of a softer chin. Excuse me. Also, probably more pointed face. One that narrows out. You'll probably feel a lot better. So you can see how I'm trying to get the most that I possibly can out of this current topology. It's important to constantly be looking at your drawing from, or your sculpt from all angles. Maybe a bit of a softer brow. So that's it, stuff that you have to kind of figure out. In 3D that maybe the 2D doesn't give you all the answers for. It's like all these relationships to this stuff. You know, her shoulders are really wide. So I think, you know, if I'm, again, I like to kind of think of things in order. So blocking out some proportions. But what's the biggest, most important thing about our characters' proportions is that they feel feminine, right? So I'll start doing that with the face, and then I go, okay, what else about this character now do we need to make feel slightly more feminine? Well, I do think it'll help to soften these shoulders and bring them in a bit more, right? So we're going to get more of that hourglass shape. I see some people in the chat know each other. That's cool. Having art friends is super important. Join an art server or draw with your friends or sculpt with your friends. Sculpt along with me if you guys, you know, want to do that. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys just sit and watch me. I doubt that that's the case. I would hope most of you are like working and doing something else at the same time. And I'm just here for friendly art background music. That's all that's kind of what I want to be. Because I think we all need that kind of motivation, you know, to be able to sit and sculpt with friends or, you know, be creative. Whether it's, you know, one person can do ZBrush or one person draws, doesn't mean you can't go do those things together. Still studying all the same basic fundamentals. But yeah, I think having that is super helpful. I think that's the biggest thing about going to like a school like Gnomon for me. Not that this is a plug for Gnomon. I mean, this is a Gnomon stream, so I can talk about it. But, you know, the strong suit of going to a place like a school like that is being surrounded by other people that also want to do the thing that you're trying to do. And that's super inspiring. I really like this this feels more elegant to the side that we're getting here that I don't quite feel yet in the front. So we're going to try to keep sculpting away. I'm getting there though. Silver Crow's asking, what do you recommend for a beginner like me who wants to improve? Are you the type to watch YouTube tutorials or study in other places? There's a lot of stuff you can figure out on YouTube. I think the biggest thing is if you're trying to learn the technicality of something, YouTube's a great place, right? You'll learn what button goes where's that button live for different programs. But then when it comes to like wanting to find you as an artist, what you like, that's just going to be a forever journey that you're going to enter into the art world. I'm still finding it. I'm still constantly also evolving and changing. What I drew 6 years ago is probably pretty different from what I draw now. There's some similarities, but you know, there's a lot of stuff that'll change over time as you adapt as an artist and as you find also other artists that you're inspired by. So I think that stuff is super important to keep in mind. Is that you're going to just be forever adapting and changing how you use those tools. But a great place to start, you know, I mean, Malko Pavlovich, at least for ZBrush, has excellent resources that are on YouTube. That guy knows every button and every secret of ZBrush. So he's a great resource, and they're all up there. Or if you feel like, you know, you need a bit more direction and guidance, you can take a class. Oh, your English is fine. Don't worry, you're fine. I can understand you. But yeah, I think, you know, if you have trouble with maybe holding yourself accountable, you know, that's where I say drawing with friends is really useful, or drawing with people, or doing something like, if you can afford it, is to take a class. You know, taking a class is a great way to extend your network of learning. I offer to all my students that even when they're done taking the class, they can still hit me up for questions, because I'm just a resource now for them being in the industry or for them learning ZBrush. You know, I'm busy, but like, if I can find the time to help you and have you grow, or if you have a real quick question about ZBrush, I'm more than happy to offer, you know, my help. I mean, anybody who hangs out in this stream long enough knows that I'll answer any question that pops through. And so, yeah, I think finding those types of resources is really helpful. You know, don't be afraid to reach out to artists that inspire you either. You know, go to GDC, go to art conventions. When I was in high school, I went to Animation Expo here in LA, and I showed David Coleman my sketchbook and asked for feedback, and I asked questions about, you know, how he approaches things. And I went around and talked to Greg Manches, and all sorts of people are there. You know, Aaron Blaze was there. I think Claire Wendling was there giving talks. I went to multiple of her talks. So I think it's important just to find those types of resources that speak to you. You know, watching shows that you like and trying to not just watch them because you like them, but understand why you like them, I think is the most important part. You know, why you like a style. You know, if you like a show, if you like Akira Toriyama's drawings, you know, from Dragon Ball, don't just like it, figure out why you like it. You know, break down your own likes and interests and shape language. And, you know, I like Dragon Ball for certain reasons. Other people might not like Akira Toriyama's art style for certain reasons. That's totally fine. That's the point. That's what's wonderful about art. Yes, Osaido is, sorry if I'm always probably mispronouncing your name, forgive me. But he makes the good point that, you know, he enjoys watching the whole process of something, right? And I think maybe it helps people slow down, because this isn't Ashley speed sculpting 101, you know. This isn't speed, like, I sculpt at my normal speed. I'm not going faster for the sake of streaming. I have to sometimes cut corners in order to make sure that we're finishing characters. in a timely manner. But, oops, I didn't want to merge that. There we go. But yeah, I'm not trying to be super fast. My goal is actually to be as fast as I normally am, because I think that, you know, like you guys mentioned, that's helpful for you guys, and that's great. If it's helpful for you, I'm going to keep doing that. I try not to skip. If I make changes or I do anything, I try to let you guys know what I did. Because yeah, I think it's more important. Gotta add a tail. I think for now, for a tail, I can just grab that. The final tail will probably just be a 2. It would probably be just as easy for me to do that right now, but whatever. It's fine. It's fine. Just something in place. Woo, look at that. There we go. Yeah, everybody learns differently. You know, some people really struggle watching a YouTube video. Some people need that in-hand, on-hands type learning. Some people can just read documentation. I'm actually one of those weirdos that if I need help with something, usually, I mean, Google will always tell you the quickest answer, but if I can't find something, I'll just try to go search through it in documentation. Because most documentation is actually pretty visual and will just tell you where things are, which is usually what I'm trying to Google these days. You know, if I'm stuck in Blender and I'm like, where's this button, or how do I do this thing? Documentation will have the answer usually, and you can just Google search that. So, you know, it just kind of depends what your learning style is as well. It doesn't work. It's not, you know, one answer for everybody most of the time. It's usually an answer is different for everyone. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just about understanding how you learn. I'm a very visual learner, and I'm a very hands-on learner. So in order for me to remember, for example, if you guys are watching this stream, if I was watching this stream, I would probably be trying to follow along. Because watching it is one thing, but I'm sure plenty of you have watched a thing and then been like, okay, I'm gonna go do it. And then you go do it and you're like, I don't remember anything about this now. Even if it's like 10 minutes later. So I'm a very much believer in do it while they're doing it. So that's usually what I try to do. And that tends to work for me, but it might not work for you. You might not be able to kind of multitask in that manner. You might have to only absorb and then try to execute later. I'm not a note taker. I don't like taking notes. I never look back at taking notes. In classes, I would always draw and listen, and I never had trouble remembering anything. I just was not a note taker. Just couldn't take notes. You know, so yeah, you just have to kind of experiment and find what works for you. I knew plenty of people that wrote down every shortcut key that the teacher taught at Gnomon. And those were just not helpful for me. I would just remember where it was on the screen because I'm just a very visual person. And just because you're a visual artist doesn't mean you're a visual learner. I do want to make that clear. It makes it seem like, no, duh, Ashley, of course you're visual, you draw. But not everybody, you know, just because you're visual or draw doesn't technically mean you're a visual learner. I think those things can be different. Just making some monkey hands right now. So I like to, this is a really easy way to just kind of populate a hand. I think the biggest thing is making sure that the curvature is there. So I actually like to look at the hand from the bottom and make sure that the middle finger is the highest point. And then we got lower and lower. I actually think this is the easiest way to make. And right now from the side looks like a hot mess, but I can just go in here now and I know that the placement's fairly accurate and I can go in here and start to, I just want to make sure I get that curvature right. And then I can kind of thin these out. And then do a auto group. And add a thumb. Now for monkeys, the palm is much longer than in humans, so we're definitely going to try to make sure that that's within our design as well. Also, you can see how long her hands are. They're a little too big, right? Doesn't matter, because I can just select them, go through here. Whoops. Come here. Mask it. And then I can scale them down a little bit and see silhouette-wise where we're. I'm gonna go ahead and bring their legs in. Feels a little too kind of bow-legged. I'm also gonna hide the tail. This is also why I keep the tail separate, is because it's easier to look at the silhouette of the legs first, like this, than it is to have the tail back there. That got really thin, but that is okay. So this is starting to where I start figuring out, okay, where are my big silhouette breaks? What's gonna make her feel slightly more feminine, So I mean, maybe these calves are a little too big, but it's all the stuff that we can kind of play with. You can give her a longer torso and see what happens. Usually long legs usually equals like kind of feminine feeling characters. Usually, not always. Maybe a little thinner. It's a little too thin. It's also helpful to hide the hands just to look at the torso and see what's reading properly. Monkeys have these really cool big thigh shapes usually, especially in, maybe not necessarily monkeys, but chimpanzees do. And again, it's just a shape that I think is interesting. So I want to try to keep this like very curved, whereas this is going to be more straight, which is also very true in just legs in general, but you can exaggerate a lot more. I also think thinning out your feet a little smaller might help. So I was just very, very micro adjusty, which is fine. This is the important part, This is the part that if you don't get right, you're just going to end up polishing a turd, which we don't want to do. Don't worry, we'll all polish turds at some point. We've all done it. We still will do it. I'll do it all the time. Maybe I did one for a stream. Who knows? Probably. But it's important for our best to try not to purposely polish turds. So just trying to think of, silhouette, and how I want this character to read, because she still feels, the thing that's bothering me the most, she still feels bow-legged. So I don't want that. And that might be just as easy as feeling like I think I almost have a silhouette. Maybe I just really actually need to turn her legs. Whoops. That's feeling a little better. And then maybe pull the legs back a little bit. Maybe that's working a little bit more. And then I can kind of thin out that calf a little bit more now. And then I can thin out this thigh. See, it's very subtle stuff where I felt like I was almost there, but not quite. And so that's, you know, it's like, oh, maybe I just kind of sculpted it in a weird direction or something. Another thing that's also, I think, throwing me off with how long her legs are is not properly putting in that hip placement. Right, so the moment you go from here to there, it automatically will make her thighs feel a lot bigger. Because her thigh is now traveling up to the proper, you know, what would be considered the hip point here. I think that's starting to get there. I can probably bring back the tail. But you can see how that silhouette just doesn't help with the tail at all. If it could like have a Z-depth pass on it or something, that would be nice, but it doesn't. So some of these things, it's just easier to make sure that you can hide. So now looking at this, I still feel like the arms could probably, or the shoulders could probably come in a little bit, but also maybe droop. So we get just a bit more of a feminine, laxed shoulder. And that doesn't mean that her shoulders can't still be pointy. I think it's fine if they still are. So making sure that we have like a very sharp turning point here, right? That can also go into what would, I'm considering this being basically like fur or something that'll kind of travel up her neck. Right, so that's starting to feel a bit more feminine. And again, it's still important to remember that even though it's a monkey or even though it's stylized, like I'll still be putting in hints of, you know, proper anatomy, you know, like this sartorius muscle, I believe it's called. It's this big muscle that starts from your hip and goes all the way inward. And it gives like this nice sense of overlap. So knowing that's there will help you understand, you know, how these volumes can be formed. And gives your sculpts a little bit more depth as well, like knowing that the volume's here and then this gets shaped back and having this maybe be like a slight muscle. It's all very helpful, even if it's stylized. And maybe later we'll simplify it even more, but it doesn't, as long as you know it's there, you know, it's kind of about having the knowledge of what is there anatomically and in real life, and then being able to break it is the most important part of, like, I think creating really interesting designs. Okay. Sculpt on those hands a little bit more. They're a bit atrocious. Start blending these a little bit. And then especially thickening up the pad here. Probably have these be a little thinner too, and maybe a little longer. Starting to add some bit of bendage. Z-spheres are also really handy for creating, they're very handy for creating hands. So maybe at some point I could demo that. I might do that next character. I'll demo doing blockouts with Z-spheres instead of, you know, doing this like Dynamesh version. I personally just like this version because it feels more, to me, it feels more like adding clay, which is what I kind of enjoy about this process. It makes it feel more traditional. But it doesn't have to be. There's plenty of tools digitally that are more useful for certain things. Ooh, that finger got funky. All right. And hands is one of those things where if you just don't get these relationships of the fingers all curling into one another and doing certain things, it's not going to feel like a hand. You could spend half of your time on hands to get them to look right. Hands are also super expressive for your character. So if you spend most of your time on the face and most of your time on the hands, you'll probably have a pretty effective character. You know, Wreck-It Ralph is pretty much just face and hand as a character, right? So, or, you know, something like Carl Fredricksen comes to mind. Let's get in there. Also trying to look at my reference for hands. Some of the hands I'm looking at are pretty creepy, but I like the proportions. Maybe not the execution of how spindly or wrinkly it is, but I think it's, again, it's important to look at that reference and then ask yourself what you like about it and how can you execute it into your own design. Because, you know, all these characters and references have a story to tell, and maybe part of those will help tell your story for your character a little better as well. It's been a long time on hands. It's getting there, though. I think there's a lot of stuff usually won't start looking right until you start merging these things properly, until you start blending this stuff together. You know, knowing that there's the little pinky bone. It's not the actual bone of the pinky, but there's your radius and your ulna, right? And your, I believe it's your ulna, which is right here, is the little, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am, because the radius is the one that goes and attaches to your thumb, which is allows you to pronate and supinate, is basically your, you know, your arms do this. Your bones in between your forearms. So they overlap one another, but the ulna has a little pinky bone on the side here. It makes for a nice little silhouette for your hands. So if you accentuate like the meeting point of that, and it doesn't have to be like super pointy, it just has to, you just have to know, again, it's more about what's stretchy versus what's hard surface. Cool. So I think I've gotten pretty far with the fact that we're still on a really low Dynamesh. I'm only on 24, right? So I think I can, and I think that silhouette's starting to look a lot better. Like, that's a pretty nice looking silhouette. I like actually the hair and I think the shoulders are working pretty well for me. I don't mind. The legs are fairly thick, but I think it's kind of cool looking for our monkey friend here. So I think this silhouette's working pretty well. From the side, I think that's being executed okay. I do think this stuff needs to get thinned out. So I think style-wise, I think I'm not going to accentuate her muscles as much. She's going to have muscle, but it'll be a bit more soft and subtle to keep that really nice feminine curvature that we have going on with the rest of her body. And I think, you know, I have her elbows being pretty pointy in the drawing, so I think we'll probably execute something like that. There might be a subtle bump or something like that. I think is fine. But I kind of like that this whole surface here is really smooth. I think that's working. You know, and you can play with how much thinner can you go. I mean, we could go really crazy and see how thin, you know, you could get. It's really up to you at that point. I think I want to accentuate where her great trochanter would be, which is going to be the widest part of anybody's hips, male or female. So you're always going to get, kind of this planar of 1, 2, right here. So I think that'll be a nice way to break that up. And you can go in with like the polish brush if you want to, and like really polish that off and make it really planar, and then kind of round it, and then you'll get like a really flat. Then it's very obvious what is considered the front of the pelvis, right? Where the tip of that hip bone is, right here. The iliac crest, which goes back, right? And then all the butt muscles basically that go up into that and form at that great trochanter. So again, even though it's super stylized, still thinking of all that structure that has to happen underneath. It only helps you make better informed stylized choices. So for example, I think I want the back of her silhouette to be more pointed. So I think I'll try to figure out where that can be placement wise for where her scapula is, right? And I'm going to try to make that a conscious decision to make sure that you can just kind of carve away until you find, I think that's starting to get there, right? So we're starting to make some more planar choices, right? So I'm making this 1, 2, 3, right? So we have this top plane, this flat plane here, and then this little bottom plane basically to kind of get this 1, 2 read, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 read. And I think that feels a little better. We can do the same thing up here. We can really make sure that this gets a flatter point. And a good rule of thumb is probably not to have these points on the same height. So either having one be a little higher, right? And then one being slightly lower and more curved. So it adds more flow. Still haven't gone up in resolution, by the way. I said I was going to, and then I continued adjusting. But this is the most important part. This is the part that we spend the most time on. I mean, I've been spending almost an hour now on this part. And you could spend longer. You don't want to noodle on forever, right? But this is, if you're going to noodle somewhere, noodle here. Okay. And I'm not really looking at, I mean, I'm looking at the scope, but I'm really more paying attention to that silhouette, to seeing if this is a silhouette that I like from all angles, right? Is it capturing what I want it to capture? Does it feel the way I want from our reference to feel, right? Trying to get these pointed feelings. And a lot of her silhouette, obviously, it comes from some clothing and stuff, but you know, how could I make her arms longer? You know, if I look at where I had her arms end here, they're pretty long, right? Is that going to feel right in 3D? I don't know. We can try it, right? So I can take this and you know how much I'm thinking I want to mask that because I like the way the top's being treated. You know, is that too much? Is making her arms this long? If we hide and look at the silhouette, I don't think it's awful. But maybe that's just a little too long, and that's something that you can either figure out, is that a stylistic choice that I really want to make. You know, because usually a rule of thumb is your elbows will end where the end of your rib cage is, and then your hands will start like mid-thigh, right? So we're pushing a lot down proportion-wise. Now for apes, it is very different. You know, if you look at a gibbon, their hands practically drag on the ground. So, you know, is this a stylistic choice that we want to go with? I think is the biggest answer. I think for me, I want to try to find maybe a happy medium between the two. So maybe her proportions aren't going to be exactly human, right? Where they end, where elbow ends there. But I don't think I want her palm passing her knee. So I think maybe something like that. And then we gotta bring this out a little bit just to make sure that it doesn't feel like she's breaking her elbows. Cool. I'm also gonna thin out her heel. Again, still haven't gone up in resolution. It's one of those things where it's a lot in this stage about checking. You know, it's kind of like the measure twice, cut once mentality. You know, double check everything before you're really ready to continue. Because the moment you start adding resolution, the harder and harder it'll get to, you know, make good decisive changes. You know, not that you can't, doesn't mean you can never go back, but it's important to try in the beginning stages to get a good feeling. Trying to get a little bit of a bend in where the toes might be. Okay. It's really important to get the feet feeling more flat and more feeling like actual foot anatomy, or else that foot silhouette will just never really look right. It's going to be kind of bothering you in a constant struggle. Now we are looking more at what maybe 8 feet could be. Which we're kind of taking a weirder liberty with this one, because I want her feet to feel like feet, but also maybe have a bit of dexterity where she could like grip around a pole. You know, like one of our references that could be fun to pose later is something like this, but what if for her, she can actually like grab the pole with her feet, right? Because that's something monkeys can do on vines and things. So adding like a little bit of creative character to something, because she is a monkey, is far more interesting than just having it be there for kind of no reason. Cool. So now we'll go up in resolution, go about 48 or so. And I don't think I have to go up that much higher for the body. I think the body's pretty figured out. It just helps me smooth out some of these other design choices here, you know? Like figuring out how the shoulder's going to go into you know, the armpit here and stuff like that. You know, and where her pec muscle is going to be. Just little subtle things as to what kind of shapes that'll make her feel like she's moving or can move. I'm going to keep her pretty stylized as far as anatomy. Like, I want this to be really simple. We'll try to execute that throughout. her design. And now I can also, with a little bit more detail, I can kind of start blocking out her face a bit more. The first thing I usually will start to block out more final will be the face. Getting kind of a defined jaw. Maybe her tuft of fur is a bit more flat, right? And not like a rounded cone. I think that'll help a lot. You can even get a subtle hint of where her lip is going to be. Right? It has not a lot of polygons. Looking at my reference, I'm wondering if her face should get a little more squash so this nose can get brought up a bit more. Trying to follow that reference because then also I have this like little extra tuft of fur that comes out like this in the reference that I like a lot. Kind of the resolution of ears or anything that thins out a lot. It's okay to go a little bit higher in resolution because otherwise they'll just diminish and you'll have nothing to work with. So for thinner things, it's easier to just go a little higher from the start. Also remember, ears have lots of thickness. I think people forget that ears are pretty thick in general. Remember, we're going with a pretty stylized ear. This is not really a monkey ear. So figuring out placement and where this ear should go in 3D space will be kind of important. In my drawing, it's just like behind the tuft of fur, but like that might not make any sense, right? So it's stuff like that that's good to figure out. And then when I get to something like this where I feel like I need to start detailing more, but again, I don't need to detail more of the body. I feel like the body's pretty figured out with that stuff. Also, you can see that as I'm sculpting, her head probably got a little too small. But that's where I'll take the head and I'll split it off. So I'll split it off like that, and then I can now go over here and make it a little bigger. If I felt like squishing her, I squished in the proportions of her face, but it made her face get a little smaller. And right now with this, she feels very gaunt, but we'll fix that. So now I can up the resolution a bit more. Just so I have more geometry to start putting in some like, where is her nose? Because her nose is very small. I mean, in my drawing it's a dot, but I'm kind of going for this reference here. which I like a lot. Like I like these shapes. And I like this kind of like cool round little part because it's kind of like an extra shape on the muzzle. So the muzzle is, you know, one nice big shape, but then on top of it is kind of like this little who nose almost, which is really cool. So I'll make that pretty subtle, but I like that distinction. This is also where I can start putting in a little bit of deeper eye sockets and start getting in details as to where her eyes will go. I use the move brush a lot too to just make sure that I feel like I'm getting the depth of the eye correct. You know, I want to make sure that this feels rounded. Because that's going to help a lot, making it feel realistic. Because it doesn't feel like just like pasted on eyes. And I do a lot of clay buildup, carve away to kind of get some shapes and the feeling of something. I felt like that was getting pretty wide. And I also will look, it's really weird, but so when I'm sculpting over here and carving away, I'm actually looking over here at this silhouette. So you can see that it was too big. So I'll go in and carve away and you can see the shapes that you're kind of carving away at. So I actually, when I'm usually sculpting on one side, I'm actually probably looking at the other. Just keep that in mind. Because it's all about looking in at the silhouette of the thing. And so I place my camera in an area that I can kind of start looking at, you know, how far out does that cheekbone go? So when I make an adjustment, like moving something in and out, I'm not looking over here, I'm looking over here. I hope that makes sense. I'm sure her brow comes up and over her eyes. Brows are protectors of eyes, so it shouldn't be farther behind than the eyeball. And you'll probably, when you zoom in and start working on the face like this, when you zoom out, sometimes you'll be like, oh man, the head got super tiny. Or that's just stuff that you'll have to compensate for, which is why it's important to kind of build this stuff up slowly and then zoom out and say, okay, how's this looking? How's this feeling? This is also, at least for me, if my job was just make block and sculpts for things, I'd be so happy. This is like my favorite part of the process, actually. Which is why when somebody asks me, like, do you start from scratch every time? Usually the answer is yes, because I actually just love this part of sculpting. This part is the most fun part for me. Because it's like bringing your character slowly to life. And like, I think it's super fun. Again, I'm a big fan of like embracing the suck or embracing the ugly. You know, when you start a project, how ugly does it get versus how much cleaner can you make it? You know, I think there's history on this guy. If we go all the way back in history, you know, like, I love that this is where I started today. Like, look at that guy. He's great. But over time, you slowly start putting those pieces together and putting all those things, and yeah, it eventually turns into a character. I think you constantly surprise yourself with starting from like here, you know. Oh man, yeah, it's so great to something that actually feels, you know, alive and organic. It's super fun. So I personally really enjoy that process. So yeah, if I have the chance to start from scratch, I totally will. At work, we make a lot of xenomorphs and stuff, and so yeah, we have bases of xenomorph meshes. But sometimes, if I get the chance, I'll just be like, I'm just gonna start over, you know, start from scratch. It's a good feeling. Also, a shout out to my man behind the scenes for picking out the music. I like this music. Now this is something to play with too, is the distance in which this nose is. I think it's important to kind of play with some rule of thirds-ish ideas, so I don't actually want the nose to be perfectly halfway. Someone on YouTube, Velasco, says that this is his favorite part too, and I'm glad. It is a fun part. I think it's a super fun part. I mean, I love sculpting detail and stuff too, but I mean, I think I probably like this because I'm also a really big fan of just sketching. I mean, it's important to learn how to finish your artwork and whatnot. It's a very important part of creating art, but I love just sitting and sketching in my sketchbook and just letting ideas flow. And I think that's where this part of 3D feels the most natural for me and feels the most fun. It's interesting because you never know like what's going to be a challenge. We're doing a female character, and female characters are I'm always much pickier about shapes. You can kind of brute force a lot of male characters or masculine characters, and it will turn out fine. But if you do the same thing to a more feminine type face, it's much more difficult to come back from. So this stream, I'll probably just spend a lot of time just like refining that shape until I feel really satisfied with it. Because I do think, I mean, you can put really big eyelashes on something and be like, it's a lady. But I think it should be more obvious than that, just through shape language alone. And this is a character who technically, like, we're not adding, if there's an idea of maybe a type of chest, but I'm not going to be fully reliant on that. Because if a male character, I'd probably, sculpt a very similar chest, but it's just more about the flow from one to another that's going to make this character feel a bit more elegant. And so, yeah, when it comes to female characters, I'm usually much pickier with like how these shapes are going to be reading. think maybe larger eyes also, because she's young and ready to learn. You know, I can tell that I'm constantly making the face smaller and smaller, so when I zoom out, like I think the face probably feels a little too small again, right? So you're just constantly having it's a definitely a constant battle. That's just the nature of usually sculpting in ZBrush is I tend to be subtractive rather than where in clay you tend to be a bit more additive usually and then kind of slowly subtract certain things. But usually it's far more of a subtractive process in at least for me in ZBrush. So yeah, trying to find that balance is always going to be. Yeah. And start throwing in where her mouth could probably be. You know, there's a variation between what's her skin versus what's fur. From the front, I don't know if I'm really capturing her smile, so I'm going to try to thin out the front of her lips, right? I'm also going to transfer over to the skin shader brush, or the skin shader. It's a little less harsh than the basic one. We're starting to get somewhere with this face shape. I'm starting to like this. Starting to slowly. I think the biggest thing about my concept is also, you know, my concept I have her face shape going down and like that. So I'm wondering, you know, how can we accentuate that in 3D? And I actually think part of it, now that I'm looking at it, I actually think her tuft of fur needs to kind of like meet it. So I can carve this stuff away. I'll try to. It's helping a little bit. I also think what might be helpful is I'm going to mask where her face outline would be. And then I'll, fur would technically be over top of it. So I'm going to smooth this out first. Smooth this out, harden that edge, hide it. Maybe build like a little bit of a, you know, an outline. It'll probably smooth away, but I think that does help kind of inset her face a bit more. And then I know that there'll be fur that kind of goes out like that. Also maybe trying to figure out where her eyebrow would be. Let's starting to feel better. I think blocking out the face like that does help a little bit because it differentiates that this is fur versus skin, and it helps you see it a bit more. Could maybe pinch it a bit. That's getting there. I think the subtle little fur direction helps just a little bit too, just for the sketch alone, just to give a little bit of an idea of where this stuff is going. I also like that now that we added this little tuft that's here, we can make her face a bit more angular, just like we did her shoulders. So I think that's also really helpful. We can start it's kind of like planing and carving this stuff out to get like nice angles and stuff. So I think that'll help a lot. Because now we have that very sharp move away. Now we have this nice sharpness to her face that I don't think we had before. It's getting there. You can also do stuff if it's easier for you. You can kind of start colorizing or just coloring it. I think that might help a little bit to get a good feeling of the character. So I can fill this stuff out. It's actually a lot darker than that, isn't it? I try not to go too dark when you're still got a lot of sculpting to do. You don't want it to be hard to see, but even in a stage like this, though, we can kind of. I'm gonna change the alpha to be a little harder. Just kind of block in where that face shape is. I think that might help a little bit. Again, whatever helps you see your final, character easier, do it. Whether it's, putting in some color at this early stage or whatever it may be. I think it's super helpful. And I had like a little tufts of lightness, right? That alone, you're just like, oh yeah, it's a character now, guys. Let's go. Woo! It's very exciting. I'm also going to duplicate this, and hair's an interesting one. So for hair, I think it's still about looking at that silhouette and trying to get it to read from all angles. So I'll thin this out and be like, yeah, maybe I want this little tuft of fur to come out. But if I turn it from the side, I can't see it. So that's where you either go, okay, maybe it could be a little lower, right? And then when you read it from all angles, I really try to read it from every angle. You're not going to be able to get it perfect every time. But I think I want, you want something that feels kind of like that. And then we can duplicate it, and maybe there's one in the back. So shape that down. And again, same thing, I'll make sure that it reads from one angle, and then maybe it doesn't read from this angle super well. So I can, you know, you can play with it. You can go, oh, maybe does it make sense if it's over here? Or does it make more sense if it's actually rotated over here? Kind of like that, maybe idea. I'm trying to give some shape variation. It's basically, you know, if I was to draw her hair from the back, how would I want it drawn? If I was to draw her hair from the side, what would it feel like? And then same thing with if it was drawn from the front, what would it feel like? You know, so you can kind of be clever about depth and placing of your hair in order to get a silhouette that looks good from, you know, a 2D angle. But you can see now as I rotate this, for the most part, except for maybe this angle, which you could bring this hair out, or I could add like an extra piece of hair. But you can see for the most part, from most angles, I get 3 strands of hair at any given time. So then I think I'll just add one more. And I'll put this down the back here. And the idea for this one is kind of hitting that weird angle where they all kind of line up and giving a bit more variance. Right? So now when I rotate it from kind of those weirder angles, maybe I'll get a little bit of something else, some extra dimension. And you can kind of start, and that's kind of how I start to block out hair in a way that feels easier, or it feels a little bit more controlled. Is again just trying to really make sure that I'm referencing that silhouette first and worrying about the other stuff later. Because now that I have this as a block in, and if I like the way this hair looks, now I can just use it as a base to add any more detail that I need to add to it, right? So, you know, if I'm liking the way all this is curving, I can kind of warp it a bit more if I want to. You know, if I'm like, oh, it needs to be thicker or taller or this or that. You know, how does it play with the base of her head? Does it kind of thin out like that a bit more? You know, so you get this curvature here. So yeah, that's how I'll usually start blocking out stuff. It's a lot easier. It's way less maintenance than trying to like sculpt individual hairs or do anything like that. Like you can still just get that nice base point and then go from there. And I'll probably, unless I really had to, will just keep the hair separate. Now I can figure out, maybe I can turn her hair a bit more. And now I'm just moving all of it around at once, but I know that that silhouette should still hold up pretty well as I rotate. Yeah. I'm gonna add some curvature to all this stuff. And we are getting there. Cool. Even if you don't see it, I mean, you see her neck, so we can kind of block out some colors. Can get a darker color maybe for tail and stuff. I think in the reference I have some gradients. I think on her tail I actually have a white tip, but it's fine. It'll be all the more poppy if I take this color now and I, whoops, white tip her tail. Also, I'm not going to do too much with the tail yet because I do have it where it's pretty cut off. I mean, I could probably just use the trim curve. Oops, not all of the trim curve though. You know, so you could easily cut it to give it a more stylized feel if you wanted to. I think it's still a little like it's probably too thick and stuff right now. Could thin it out, could polish it. I said I wasn't going to do anything and then here I am doing it. But I think it'd be fun to try to make her tail feel a little bit more stylized than maybe a normal tail could feel. Could be kind of fun. But a lot of that I would probably do in just like a low poly and not try to figure too much out because it's supposed to be just a nice clean tube to begin with anyway. So that's the part that's like, there's no sense in really messing around with it too much because you're just going to make it clean topology anyway. And there's a lot of stuff I can figure out easier with clean topology. Cool. Save. Don't forget to save, guys. Oh, where am I? I don't know where I am. Don't read it. Oh wait, no, I'm in Gnomon. So many folders, you guys. I thought I had this already up and ready to go. Hey, this time I didn't accidentally write it in all caps. Look at that. Learning as we go. Oops. Add their fingers. We can turn on backface masking and that should help not have color go through places you don't want it to go through. Cool. So now we have her. We can try blocking out some clothes in the next 30 minutes. I have pretty simple clothes on this, but I do have, like I said, this reference. I think this is pretty interesting. I like this little collar and I like this triangular shape with this like belt with a shirt underneath. So I might try to do, I don't think it's going to be this fancy. I think it's still going to feel more practical, like in the realm of, you know, monks. But I think it'd be more interesting to just to give a bit more of a layered feel. I think could be more fun. So we're going to try to do that. Oh, Rono on, are you Rono and Zoro? Oh my god. Zoro's watching, guys. Rono on YouTube is saying, imagine what this character looks like Super Saiyan. If that's the case, you know, she goes full on yellow. Can make her hair go, you know. It'd be fun. So again, with making shirts and stuff, it's a pretty simple process that I like to do. I'll just duplicate it. Take the parts that I need. And then I'll delete the rest, undo groups, and merge them together. You can even make it lower resolution if you need to. This is already pretty low, but then what I'll do is I will use the slice curve. I'll cut away I need something like that. Mirror weld. And then all I want is this. So now I have this open kind of shirt. And then what I can do is I can do a Z-remesh on it. You could probably give it some guiding lines for the shoulders, so I can cut that. And then say keep groups and do another one. And then run it by half, half again, half again. Maybe it's something like that. Oh, it's that terrible color. And then we'll run a little inflate on it. You know, it's a pretty simple block in for a shirt. And this other one they had or in the reference there was like a cool little collar that had, so we could extrude edge loop, and we can pull this up. And then we could probably just delete the front. Of that to give it like a little bit of a collared look. Turn on double, see what I'm doing. Can mask this is a bit of low poly modeling workflow that I personally really like. I can just move the collar around. So I keep everything super, super low. I'm just trying to find cool, interesting shapes that also fit with her, you know, her body. I'm a big fan of low poly modeling. Because for me also with this stuff, I don't like to usually just sketch in clothes because I know I'm just gonna have to go over it anyway. So for me, I kind of do a simple box modeling type feel. Not sure what color. I mean, we had orange before, so we'll see if that stays. I'm not really sure yet. But then we can easily, you know, go in here and say, oh, we got some, you know, if we push and pull this stuff around, we can easily get a little bit of silhouette for some cloth folds and stuff. Especially for keeping it like super stylized, there's nothing wrong with, you know, playing with that. And then same thing with pants. Do that same process, so duplicate. All I need is really probably this and this. Right? I'll delete hidden. Give her some tan brown pants. Dynamesh. I just think this is the way easier way of creating pant geometry. And I mean, it'll never be perfect, but for animation purposes, technically you want to make sure that there's like some sort of loop that goes around like that. ZBrush might help you with it. There we go. Cool. Maybe not that low. That's probably fine. And then again, I can run an inflate. So just a real quick and easy way to block out some pants. You can always project it back on too, like if this part's being a little problematic, you know, or you can't quite get to fit around a certain way, you can reproject it on, and that'll work just fine. Once you add thickness and stuff, it's not really a big deal. You can also, since this is a nice little loop there. I can mask it, and then I can pull this out and kind of give her the baggy pants look that I was going for without messing up that topology. But also keeping it, you know, tight to her legs. And then we can do something like in the reference, there's like a really big belt here. So we can, just gonna go ahead and this time, well, I mean, I will sometimes just grab something like this and duplicate it and then just turn it into a cylinder. I mean, it's the same as inserting a cylinder, but at least it's somewhat in the right place. And I can rotate this 90. And we can keep the inner inside if you want for now. Doesn't really matter at this moment. But I like the idea of the belt kind of goes upwards. It's pretty thick belt, so I like that. I think that's cool. Also, we don't need this edge loop right now, so I can just delete that. Kind of just move this around instead. The thickness helps a little bit just to make sure that it's, you know, sitting fairly properly. And then for something like making that T shape, well, we already have this, right? So again, I can duplicate this and then I can get rid of this and this, delete hidden, and I could probably get rid of this center line here. Oof. That's some not very friendly geometry, but that's okay. Maybe it's more like a... I'm gonna delete hidden. Probably to get rid of this too. And it might not have to go all the way around. I'm trying to see, it kind of goes up. It kind of just does this number. Again, I know it looks crazy, but just trust me. And then we could do a Z remesher on this and see what we get. Just maybe keep it same. Yeah. Sometimes if I don't get the remesh I want, I'll do an inset. And usually that will help. Or splitting these off into, it keeps polish. Oh, that's why, because smooth groups is on. Oops. That's working a little better on one side. Whoops. I just don't need all this stuff, so you can go in and stitch it if you want to. I don't really mind doing stuff like that. I think it's pretty easy to go in and just be like, I don't need this stuff. You know, I'm just trying to simplify, and you can just simplify it to one side for now. I just don't need all that, right? And then I can move this over. Same thing with this. Oh my goodness. Give me this first. It's being very mean right now. Sometimes it doesn't like working in symmetry. It just likes to be a little punk sometimes. Now I can inflate that, and then I can move these shoulders out. And later you could also do really crazy things, like you could grab this and I could just cut this away. So you could do something where I would hide the back first, because I like the back. And just say, go away. I don't like you, you know. And then you can kind of split that stuff off. I won't do that probably right now. I don't think it's necessary. But you can be very picky about choosing what you want to do with it. And then we can get something that maybe feels like it's tucking into the belt. Right, that creates kind of a fun silhouette. I feel like a lot of the costume colors will have to change because of that. But we'll see. Maybe instead of orange, we'll go with some like reddish type. Can do a polish by features. That helps. There we go. So we get something that kind of feels like it's laying on top. And again, we'll, I like the idea of making this feel kind of like draped. Oof. See, this kind of geometry, no, go away. Look at that, trying to be so mean to me. But it'll all work out in the end. There we go. Stuff like that later will cause problems and it's annoying. Cool. Someone on Twitch is asking, do I know what side of the geometry will be copied when you click the mirror button? Yeah, it's always, so if your character's facing this way, like if you have this head up here, if they're facing with the head, the left will always mirror to the right. I, however, always tend to work on the right side. I work in symmetry, so that one I didn't have to mirrored weld. But I know that because usually I work on the right side, I almost always have to go and do a mirror and then mirror and weld. So mirror just flips it, and then mirror and weld will actually delete one side and mirror it to the other, right? So, yeah. Yeah, you can totally use it when you have one side sculpted, but it also works just fine when, you've messed with something on one side, and then see if I do a mirror and weld, it's always going to do the left. So if I want this, then I just want to make sure I mirror it first to the left and then do a mirror and weld, right? So yeah. It's really annoying, by the way, that if you don't have so I have a custom setup here where mirror and weld are on next to each other, but in reality, mirror is actually in deformation, and then mirror and weld is up here into, oh God, I can find it. I'm a teacher. Mirror, modified topology, mirror and weld. So to constantly go back and forth to go down to deformation, zo mirror, and then go back up here, and then go to mirror and weld is just really annoying. So I would highly recommend, even as a beginner, use a custom interface to just put a few buttons together. Like these buttons, mirror, mirror and weld, delete, hidden, you're going to be using those all the time. So especially if you're like me that sometimes forgets to go in and out of symmetry. I'll also accidentally hit X sometimes and accidentally get out of symmetry without knowing it, which is also why I'm a big proponent of working with no resolution for as long as possible, meaning working with no subdivisions. Because the moment you have subdivisions, mirroring and mirroring welding becomes 10 times more difficult, excuse me. So, because you can't. So you have to do things like go to your highest res and then delete your subdivision levels, and then you can mirror and weld, and then you can reconstruct subdivisions. It's not impossible. It's just a bit slightly more annoying. I think this is a little too far away. And maybe this is... These are just weird choices, but to me, I kind of like this idea of this breaking a bit. Or maybe not, I guess. I mean, looking at the silhouette, it's actually not that bad. It doesn't bother me as much when I look at silhouette. I'll leave it for now. Yeah, Twitch is talking about customized workspaces. I think when you're learning ZBrush, it's important to know where everything is, because obviously when you look up tutorials and stuff, if you just start putting buttons places, you know, without, especially if you're using, like if you try to use somebody else's, like if I tried to give you my setup over here, for example, great, you know this, and that's not really it's not bad, but if you've never touched ZBrush and you don't actually know where projectile is, and this happens to me all the time where I'm teaching and I have all these buttons here and I have to remember where all these buttons live, you know, in the real ZBrush. And to be honest, sometimes I'm just like, sorry guys, let me look this up real quick because I don't remember, right? Because I use a very custom interface. And so, yeah, it's really important, I think, to actually learn ZBrush just the easier way. But as you start knowing where mirror is and where it is, and if you keep traveling through palettes too much, and it's starting to slow you down, that's when it's time to turn on that, you know, enable customize and get yourself a nice little button shelf. Even if it's just little buttons up here, you know, or to the side. You don't have to go this crazy and make a whole palette. I think it's easier that way as you start working, but I've been working in ZBrush for 10 plus years or whatever it is. However long it's been, I don't know. I know it's been 10 years since I started Gnomon, which is crazy to think about. So, yeah, if you don't travel with your customized brushes, it can definitely be a pain. And it is important, like if you do go somewhere and you have to just use what they got, it's definitely important to know how to do that. So we can create the little balls that go around her neck. I'm going to use a ray mesh. I feel like I can't do anything. If I'm in a blank ZBrush and I don't have my custom UI, I'm just like, oh no. I've gotten better since I've started teaching, because I have to use just the standard. But yeah, it can be very annoying. I rotate, there we go. Do 360, right? Because we wanted to go all the way around. We could pick the number of want to leave a little bit of a gap. 15 actually seemed okay. 16? Let's go with 16. This isn't perfect right now, but it's a good placeholder. Obviously, you know, it's one of those things that you have to think about, that you don't want to warp. You know, if I want to move this down to feel like it's overlapping on a, you don't want to warp your spheres. So this will take some gentle tweaking when it gets there. But I think for now, it's fine. Or we could do the, ooh, she's got the floating, you know, like floating Akuma balls or something, which is always a fun option. But I think for now we'll go a little bit more chill with it. And then we can always take that. We can either duplicate it or start adding stuff to the wrist, for example. Now this makes the balls very small, but we can also do stuff like inflate it. Oh, my Stegatron UI. Yeah, I've had Stegatron for a long time now. I like Stegatron as well. So now we could inflate this and say auto group, and then we could like get rid of every other one. Right, if we wanted to keep kind of the same size. It was even, right? I put 16. I'm not crazy. Yeah, okay, I'm not crazy. Yeah, trying to do even numbers. I was like, on this one. There we go. So now we have, the balls, but they're the same size, but they're less. So, you can choose whether or not you want to do something like that to make sure that they're similar sized, but on the wrist, that could be kind of interesting. Or they could have smaller beads. I mean, in my reference, there's examples of larger ones and smaller ones. So I think we'll play with that later on as to what that could be. But just to show you, you can easily take, your same asset and make it smaller. And I think eventually I'll put like a cool wood texture on those. I think that'll be fun. It's really easy to make a wood texture in ZBrush. So we can totally play with that. I think for now, that's pretty much blocked in so far. And then we can add we'll add the cool her little pack and stuff probably next week, and start detailing some stuff. But yeah, we're running into time. So remember to save your work, you guys. Saving. And I hope you guys enjoyed this version or this stream of Archetype, sponsored by Lenovo and AMD, and with your host, truly, me, Ashley. So yeah, we got pretty far. I think we had a good time sculpting in a block in, and I hope it was helpful. I'm excited to keep working on this character. So next week we'll finalize her body, and we'll finalize, the face more, and we'll start, blocking out more detail into her clothing and stuff like that. So yeah, I think she's coming along, and I think it'll be really fun to pose. We'll also do her weapon and stuff at some point as well. So we've got, 3 more weeks of building her out. And you guys know, the final pose is always, or the final stream is always the posing. So that'll be a lot of fun. So, all right, you guys, I will catch you next week, and you guys have a wonderful Tuesday night. Bye.